Good morning and welcome to another edition of Badass Marketing. I am joined today by the ever so lovely Angela Dunce. Angela, how are you?
I am great. How is everybody else on the call? It's a Friday.
It's a Friday. We were out all week, so we are like buried under and trying to recover. But we did enjoy a couple of days. We went down to Paso Robles and saw some killer lights. And then we kept going and went down to Palm Springs to enjoy a little desert activity and just getting out of the city, that kind of thing. And then drove home yesterday, like took forever. Like I think it took 10 hours to drive home. So it's Friday of a very short week. So we're just regrouping and ready to launch into 2024. Can you believe that?
Well, and next week is a short week too. It's Martin Luther King Day on Monday.
It is. It is. So we got, but I think I might be working Monday just because we've been out of the office and
Lollygagging.
right, just hanging out doing nothing, you know what I mean?
But there is so much nothing to do, and it definitely supports the creativity that we need to be able to serve our clients well.
So we went on vacation with the intent of just relaxing. Okay. And it turned
Good.
into a nonstop itinerary that was more packed than if I had stayed home. We went to
And
Joshua Tree. We were in Palm Springs. We toured Palm Springs. We went to Trixie Motels. Trixie, somebody's motel. We checked that out. We went to Paso Robles. Like we went to the outlet malls. We did it all. So it's like I need a vacation from my vacation. So
and that is
anyway,
the American way, for heaven's sakes.
exactly. Just like how much more stuff can we cram into this, right?
Yeah.
So 2024, you were sort of chatting about before we launched that, bunch of stuff is changing, right? Like digital marketing is changing, the role of the CMO is changing, agencies are struggling. What's going on? What do you think?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm going to take a step back from the one about the agencies, and I'm going to say that, there has been a time when everybody and his brother could open up a shop and say, hey, we'll do lead generation for you, or we'll do SEO for you. And they had no training, no idea what they were doing. And they oversaturated the market with promises that they couldn't keep.
Mhm.
And so I think a lot of those types of first of all, they've given some of us reputable shops a bad name.
Yeah.
Um, but there are a lot of smaller agencies that are going by the wayside. And another problem with creative agencies is we love to do new and creative things. That doesn't mean they're profitable. So profitability is something that is going to need to be first and foremost, and not just with creative agencies, but with solopreneurs and small business. It's great that you can do all these different things, but I think there's a new focus on what is your sweet spot and where is your profitability.
And I would take it a step even further back. And what I would say is it's really about setting those expectations because we do try a lot of new things and we do try, we do a lot in SEO and all those types of things. But these things take time. They're not, quick fixes. They're not instant gratification. Um, and, I think that's, in the folks that are misleading people with regard to these types of services, it's sort of like, we will rank you number one tomorrow. Like, yeah, those types of promises and those types of expectations is where credibility goes out the window. We do try new things because we're interested in, what their impact is. We tend to try them on our own platforms and our own websites before we launch them into our customers. But we also, make our customers aware that SEO is not a quick fix. That, there are things that will impact the market. And I think quite notably, generative AI in the last year or so and ChatGPT, has become a big factor in like, do you need to hire content writers, or can you just get by with ChatGPT and those types of things? So I think there is a big shift in the landscape. There'll be a natural fallout as well, but I think really when working with clients, it's about setting those expectations. Like, if you set the expectations that this is going to be an overnight success, yeah, there's probably a pretty good probability that everyone's going to be disappointed.
Yes. Yeah. And that is not good for business, not for anybody's business.
Yeah, and I think also you sort of mentioned these sort of new startups not having experience. We recently started a project where there had been an existing um, person in place, and they were doing some work, and their work was fine, except that they hadn't optimized anything. So, all of the work sat there, right? And there was, a fair amount of content that they had generated, which isn't a bad thing. They did a good job from the content perspective, but then they hadn't optimized anything. So it just couldn't be found. They hadn't used meta tags, they hadn't used any of, link strategies or anything like that. That are just some really, really basic SEO, functions. Um, and then they weren't generating any traffic. And it was, the client attributed the lack of traffic to the content. And that really wasn't the case. The content was fine. It just hadn't been optimized. So there was just no means to find it.
That's so interesting. Yeah, and the expectation thing, I just really want to stress that I got an email today from somebody that said that they could book me 548 appointments this year. 540, okay, that's a really random number. And I could not handle 548 appointments this year. I could not.
But I mean, the idea, like, I could handle 548 appointments, maybe not 549, but 548 is completely doable. Um, you know, if it's a strategy because that's a case of where you're building your business, the intent is with that type of volume and those amount of new clients and onboarding, you would be, that's building an agency. That's where, you would have to hire people and do things like that. But, just forget that. Like that's a perfectly viable business model. But let's go back to some stranger who doesn't know your business is promising to generate leads. And you don't know the nature of my business. You don't know, how I get clients. You don't know any of those things. So again, it's about setting these expectations. I as well get a lot of those, like, we will generate business, we will generate business. Um, I have been working with a client, and it's a client that I've had for a very long time that has always had a cold calling aspect to their business. And the cold calling aspect of their business has never worked, has never, ever, ever, never, never, ever worked. And I have, continually sort of suggested, because they're the client and they do what they want, and they're for some reason very embedded to this cold calling concept. And I'm like, that's
Ding.
not a good return. And they've gone through a ton of people on the cold calling side because it's just not effective.
Yeah.
It's, you can't call a stranger and like, hey, do you want to buy my product? Yes, theoretically, if you read the marketing books, that, if you hit enough numbers, you're inevitably going to get, 99 no's to get your one yes, right? Well, that's just not the most productive use of anybody's time when it comes to lead generation. Whereas, a real lead generation strategy would be to clearly identify your target audience, begin to build user personas, understand their pain points, address their pain points. Those, where there's a concerted effort upfront to understand your audience, understand what they're looking for. We have historically and routinely talked about making sure we're using the voice that the potential client is using so they can find us, and using a variety of tools to do that, such as Answer the Public. But, really spending a fair amount of work and time up front to begin to understand the nature of that target audience. And then once, I mean, this is an agile process, right? Once you start and launch this, then you need to tweak it and modify it based on the responses you're getting. And, we thought this keyword was the one that was, going to be a driver, and it turns out it's another one. So we need to, change our verbiage a little bit. But it's really an agile process of refining and refining and refining until you get to a point where you're just generating leads. And I don't believe that is what's going to happen with the person who's offering you 548 appointments.
No, I don't think
Just
they're
a
gonna.
guess on my part. I could be wrong, but I'm thinking no.
Think you might be dead on, Mike. Yeah.
What's interesting to me though, like, we need to set our expectations, and that's very clear when we're working with our clients, that we need to set expectations and make that. But what's interesting is I was recently engaged by a prospect, and they wanted to hire us. And of course, my response to that is, well, let me understand what you're asking for before, I spent a lot of time writing proposals and stuff like that. And they're like, and they were just really hot and bothered, which is, for me, is always a bad sign when someone's in a big hurry to hire you, right?
Oof.
So I pushed back a little bit and said, I need to clarify this. I need to understand this. What are you looking for? And this is industry specific, so it's in the cannabis industry, and we have a fairly good knowledge of that industry. So, I'm like, well, what are you looking for? What are you doing? And they were just completely vague, and they just wanted to hire us. And I was like, yeah, if I don't know what I'm working on, I'm not, agreeing to it. And so I pushed back, pushed back, pushed back, and finally the information starts to trickle out. And what they're doing is they're promoting a product in the industry, and we've seen this a lot in the cannabis industry, that while not illegal, not quite legal, right? So it's one of these derivative products that sort of circumvents the THC laws, and we have zero interest in being associated with anything like that. So we ultimately, politely declined and said thank you, but this is not the sector that we're willing to work in. But this was like over a course of 3 weeks where I was like, until I have a better understanding and understand what you're looking for, I can't help you.
Yes.
So getting the client to sort of clarify why they're trying to hire us, and they wanted to hire us because nobody wants to touch this space because it's not like, again, it's not illegal, but it's not legal. So it's one of those things.
Wow.
Yeah. And I looked it up online, and something like 18 states have banned the product, and I'm like, yeah, I don't want to be anywhere near this thing. But again, this was probably a series of 10 to 15 emails back and forth. They were reluctant to get on a call, which is another red flag for me, where, like, they're not wanting to do that. So for us, there is actually a genuine screening process before we're willing to engage. This person was willing to hire us, and we weren't prepared for that because we didn't feel comfortable knowing enough about the client to decide whether or not we wanted to take them on. But
Yes.
we spent a fair amount of time just trying to understand what their needs were, so that we could understand whether or not that was something we were willing to fulfill. And in this case, it was not. God bless you. Gesundheit.
Yeah, and that's always an interesting dynamic to try to navigate also, because seriously, if it's not a good fit on both sides, how are you going to reach a successful solution? It's just not it's just not going to work.
Well, I mean, and in addition to, just like, it's very hard. It's very hard to figure out something's going to be a good fit up front. We don't have an experience together. We don't know each other. But one of the key things for us is when the client can't clearly define what they're looking for, right? Because we've spent a lot of time working with clients where, like, oh, we'll know it when we see it, or we'll, let's try this, let's try that, and what we realize is that we end up doing a tremendous amount of rework because the client is like, it's close, but no, but and we had one client that we worked with over about a 6-month period, who actually was and is a friend of mine. And this client, like nothing was working, nothing, and he's a friend, so I'm trying to be very sensitive to that. So finally, after about 6 months of, like preparing stuff, sending it, no, asking for clarification, there was none other than that wasn't it, and, it's a friend of mine. So I said, look, this isn't working. I don't know what you want because you can't seem to convey it. And I obviously said it in much nicer words. But, you know, it doesn't make sense for us to continue until you have a better understanding of what you're looking for. Or maybe it's just not us. Maybe we're not the right agency for you, which is fine. We're good with that. But to just sort of keep sort of,
Yeah.
reworking work for the sake of rework, we didn't need to do that.
No one wins. No
Nobody
one
wins.
wins.
So I guess the theme of today's podcast, since we weren't like sure what it was going into it, is really setting clear deliverables, expectations, understand of what is being asked for so that, we understand what we're building on behalf of the client, and then figuring out what metrics or KPIs are available to ensure that we can measure whether or not we're being successful.
Yeah. One of my favorite questions in this process is, what have you tried in the past? Because if they can't answer that, if they can't, that sometimes will uncover what it is that they're looking for. Because if they can tell me something concrete that they've tried in the past, that gives me a lot of clues as to what it might be that they're looking for.
Right. And if they can't, then it also tells you that like they don't have a good idea of what works and doesn't work for them, right?
Right. Well, and the whole, I find, I don't know if you find it too, Mike, but in the term lead generation, I think everybody has a completely different idea of what that actually means and how long it takes to build a lead. And that at some point it's no longer our responsibility, it's their responsibility.
Well, I mean, again, understanding the definition, but what is even a lead? Like, because we have cold leads, warm leads, hot leads, I mean, it's like, if somebody is, offering me 548 leads and it's just basically a list, that's cold calling, right? Like, so what? Yeah, I can find 548 people to call. That doesn't mean that I would or that I want to. Um, right. So,
Yes.
what is a lead, right? At what point, how warm is this lead? Like, because a lot of these people are like, oh, well, we're going to book you calls. Well, it's like, you know, I don't know that I want to be on a call with somebody, like, unless I have a better sense of what it is that they're looking for, or what, how can we meet their unmet needs?
Exactly. Yes, there have to be some parameters. What qualifies as a great client? I mean, warm bodies are just not going to do the trick. There has to be some parameters around all of that.
And we have both done referral marketing and gotten leads, whatever that means. Okay. Um, so like the person, and this wasn't a paid function, this was just, referral marketing. But the person in their mind had done their job. They gave us a lead.
Yes,
But if they don't know who we are and they don't know what type of clients, I've gotten leads that like, yeah, I'm never going to do this type of business, or I don't have an interest in this type of business based on what you're telling me this client is looking for. There are certain things that we will do as part of a larger engagement, but not as a standalone. Like, so we will build a website, but that's not our primary function. Our primary function is content marketing. So, if you refer someone to us to build their website and that's all they want from us, that's not a great lead, because that's not really the kind of business, it's a one-off, and it's, a lot of work for minimal return. Whereas if you refer someone because they want to build a website, that will lead into future, content engagement. That's interesting to us. So, for us, getting a lead isn't enough. We want to refine that. Like, we want a good lead. We want a warm
qualified
lead. We want
leads.
a lead that aligns with what we're willing to, the type of work that we're willing to engage in.
Right. Yes. Just because I'm a LinkedIn consultant, I get people sending me job seekers all the time, and I do not work with job seekers. I do not. It's not a good fit for me, for a number of reasons. I want to work on business development. I don't want to work on attracting recruiters. My brain does not work the same way that employees work. And so it's really hard for me to get into that mindset. It takes an awful lot of extra work for me to figure that out. I want to work with entrepreneurs who have lots of ideas and specific goals. So the job seeking market is just, I send them to somebody else who does love to work with that market. And they're very different concerns, very different solutions. I don't do that.
Right. And it's really just about making sure that we align with, the lead, whatever you want to call that, has to align with what, the nature and the type of businesses that we're willing to work with.
And the type of offerings that we have. I don't do interviewing skills. I don't do resumes. I don't do any of that stuff. And there are people that do the full package, including LinkedIn. It's not
So,
me.
so what do you think the biggest confusion is with regard to lead generation? Like, is this something that you can outsource? What's your take on that?
I think that you need to do an awful lot of market research and trial and error, before you can outsource that. It needs to be a proven, well tested system. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions that a lot of people have is that you don't have to go through this trial and error process, and that lead generation is something that you turn a faucet on and it immediately starts kicking out leads. And I don't think, how often has that ever happened? you know, there is a process to it. Tweaking the language so that you're using the right language for your target audience, really making sure that that target audience is the one that is looking for the solution that you have to offer. The images that you're using for some of the lead generation or whatever it is that you're doing, the way you talk about the problem or the result, that really has to be taken care of before you can start doing really good lead generation on any platform.
I mean, and one of the things that we always sort of focus on is really just narrowing down, you know, what the unmet need is and to see if it aligns with what we can do. Because we don't need to engage, we're in a position where we don't need to engage unless we want to engage, which is a very advantageous position, and I'll acknowledge that. But we want to be able to bring something to the client that adds value, that's measurable, that we can demonstrate that we've made an impact. And if it's the type of engagement where like that's not clear, we would probably not want to pursue that.
Well, and I have had a couple of clients come to me recently who really don't understand social media. And so their expectations have been way out of alignment on how this actually works. And, if you don't have an audience on LinkedIn, how are you going to do lead generation on LinkedIn? You have to have that network already in place. If you have 52 connections on LinkedIn, I'm sorry, I can't do lead generation for you.
Right. And there's other strategies that maybe we can do or that someone else can do. It may not, like you said, sometimes you just refer them somewhere else where, instead of a lead generation strategy on LinkedIn, either we can or you will outsource it to a better partner, who will create more of an awareness strategy where help them begin to develop those contacts and begin to, generate awareness at the top of the funnel. It may not be something that you do, maybe something that you say, here's what you need. You need awareness, not lead generation. You don't have enough contacts to do lead generation. So where you should focus your efforts on is creating those contacts and doing lead awareness. So, and that might be a different partner, and we can likely refer you to that partner if necessary.
Yeah, and in some cases, I mean, paid ads might work because you can target audiences, in a very focused way. But then you have to have a method for creating connections with those leads that you're generating so that you're building your network at the same time that you're doing lead generation. And that also requires A/B testing and a bunch of other things.
And when it comes to paid ads, for me at least, the most important thing is to determine what the metrics of success are, right? Am I looking for views? Am I looking for connections? Like what is the outcome that I want? Some people just want a lot of traffic to their site, so they're willing to pay. And if we say, hey, we went from 1,000 views a day to 20,000 views, that's the metric that they're focused on, and that's a success. So as long as we define the metric up front and clarify what they want, then we can figure out whether or not we're being successful towards that target. But it's when they're like, oh, we want more business. Like, what is that? What does that mean? I can drive eyeballs, I can drive conversions, but I have to understand what the metric is that you consider a success, right? Because if I drive a ton of traffic that doesn't convert, is that a success? Depends on what you consider, a success. So we very clearly want to understand the underlying metrics of how you define the success, so that if we're doing lead generation or if we're assisting you in lead generation, we can determine whether or not we're good at it, in a reasonable time frame. But if we define that lead generation means an appointment made or a phone call accepted, we can measure that. We can track. We contacted 100 people, 20 of them agreed to engage further, and then we'll track those metrics. And then the other thing about paid is based on those metrics, whether or not it's cost effective. Because if you're not paying attention to a paid campaign, you can spend a ton of money and not generate a return. So we want to understand, like, what is the return on these efforts? Because yes, I can generate lead generation. If I spend $1 million on LinkedIn, I'm sure I'm going to get somebody.
But
Right?
is it worthwhile?
But that one person I get after spending $1 million, the ROI might not be there.
Well, and here's a
So
news flash for you. January 1st, a lot of things changed on LinkedIn, and I'm just starting to hear from some of my clients about some of the changes. But one of the ones that I actually read a couple of articles about is that they've increased the price on the paid ads by about 30%.
hmm. And is there any underlying rationale to that?
LinkedIn is shifting more towards the paid model little by little. And they're
Hmm.
getting a little bit more aggressive about shifting towards that paid model. I have had a client tell me that she sent 5 invitations to people with the free LinkedIn, and then they cut her
Hmm.
off. That's all she had for the month was 5 invitations. It's really hard for me to believe, and I'm going to be testing this out. But they are stripping some of the things away from the free version of LinkedIn.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing across the board when it comes to social media platforms is this, more transparent, it's always been there, but it's more transparent that, it's a pay to play, you know, type of scenario, right? LinkedIn, if you want visibility, pay to play. Facebook, if you want LinkedIn, pay to play. And LinkedIn had been a place where you could make contacts and do things, just socially by being there. And as you've indicated, that's shifting to more of a pay to play model. I think X is having a similar thing, like, if you want this, because I've done a couple things on Twitter in the last Twitter or X, formerly known as Twitter, that like, oh, that's a paid upgrade now. I was like, oh, there you go. So yeah, and that harkens back to last week's episode about, you need to find alternative platforms because some of these platforms clearly, the ROI is just not there. you can buy ads, but if you're not getting the return, you need to figure out some alternative means. So go listen to last week's podcast about creating own properties and, building your own mailing list and, creating your own networking group and those types of things, because the social media platforms are going to be more and more expensive, and the algorithms are continually sort of decreasing visibility for anything organic.
Yes. Yes. I had somebody come to me this last week that wants to build an email list. And so people are beginning to understand that they need to own their assets. And, you know,
Great. We've only been saying it for 10 plus years, and now they're starting to listen.
well, at least they're learning, Mike.
Yes, but the problem is by the time they figured it out, we probably should be doing something different. So,
Things are
but the
changing
mailing list is
so
still,
rapidly.
yeah, but the mailing list, I would agree, is still a very important key to your marketing mix.
Yeah. Mine is golden. I mean, I can't imagine my business without it. I can't.
Yeah. Yep. And I get your emails and I read them and forward them and all that kind of stuff. So, I am an
Thank
active
you.
reader of your as a subscriber.
Well, the next one is going to be about haters.
About haters. Am I on the list? What are you telling me? Like, is that the disclosure?
Last week I talked about I hope you are doing well, or I trust
Right.
you are doing well. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and share that post and let people come to their own conclusions. I mean, when was the last time you used "to whom it may concern"? There are things that are they're evolving out of some of our language, and I think that's one that needs to be replaced by something a little more personal. Actually, I had 3 people this week start their email to me jokingly as "I hope you are doing well," and they put it in all caps. And I
Yeah,
thought
I
that
mean,
was
what's interesting,
hilarious.
I very rarely use to whom it may concern, but I can say that if I'm outreaching to something, and it's typically like a government agency or something where like I don't know who the contact is, but and I don't know the person well enough to say, hey, Mary, what about this? But so if I'm outreaching to a government agency and to whom it may concern, please tell me where I should be, or please direct me to the right party. So I'll use it
There,
in
it's
that scenario,
completely appropriate.
but never, but that's not a marketing effort. That's me making an inquiry, a direct inquiry. Whereas I would never use to whom it may concern in a marketing piece. Hey, if this is you, read this. If not, because I love that, because we get a lot of emails where the footer has a disclaimer like, if you're not the intended recipient, it's like, well, why is that my responsibility? You should have figured out whether I was the intended recipient before you sent it to me. It shouldn't be my job upon receipt to determine whether I'm the intended recipient. Right?
Yes, yes. There are so many random acts of marketing these days, and it's embarrassing to watch.
And I think that the takeaway from this is you, that if you're just out there pushing volume, which most of these things are, where you're just like a numbers game. Like if I call 200 people, I'm inevitably going to get one or two who might say yes. If that's your approach to marketing, then one, I don't think it's very effective. Two, I don't think it's, the ROI would be there. I don't think the KPIs are there. Um,
It's not cost
we be
effective.
right, but we believe that you need to do your homework before you launch one of those, right? Understand who your target audience is, understand what their unmet needs are, create some buyer personas. It was interesting as I told you, we're working with a new client, and while we're working with an existing client where they've brought in some new marketing folks, and we're part of that mix, and the guy's like, we're going to do buyer personas. Like, yay. I'm like, go back, look at this file. Here are all the buyer personas we have on this client. Like it's been done. Let's not recreate the wheel. We're happy to update them. We're happy to revisit them with you. But no, we're not starting over. There are buyer personas that over years we've developed that and that's always the interesting aspect when somebody new joins the mix. They're like, oh, we're going to do all this stuff, and it's like, well, again, before you do all this work, why don't you go back and sort of do, a cursory review of what all already exists. This person came in as well, and they were like, I've set up all these files over here, and I'm like, yeah, well, we don't work over there. We work in teams, and we have 3 years worth of history in teams. So we're not moving off of teams. So, since you've come in, maybe you might want to adapt to what already exists versus trying to recreate it on a different platform that we're not happy to move to. So, it's all about
Wow.
do a little homework up front, right? Whether it's in lead
Find out what you're
generation,
dealing with.
yeah, versus just stepping in and like creating stuff for the sake of creating stuff. We're not big fans of creating stuff unless, there's a purpose to it.
See efficiency. Yes. And buyer personas do need to be updated on occasion,
Sure, sure,
or
absolutely.
they can be segmented into smaller, different categories as well. But definitely work with what has worked in the past.
Yeah, I mean, this is a business that's been in business for 20 plus years. Obviously, we've tried things and we've done things, and some have been successful and some are not. So there has been, some historical knowledge as it relates to marketing. And, don't just simply ignore that because you're new and you have all these fresh ideas. Because some of your fresh ideas we may have tried, and some of them have worked and some of them haven't. But, there has definitely been there's a knowledge base that does exist that we should look at and talk about, and then strategize how to move forward from there.
Yes. Yep. Having a marketing plan this year is going to be completely essential, and it should be based on what has been tried and failed and worked in the past, and updating things for the current marketplace.
And I'm all for trying new things. I like new things, and a Chat GPT is clearly an example of like this is a great tool. We like it. We love it. So we're more than just because we haven't used it before doesn't mean we're unwilling to use it. But when we first sort of you know sort of stuck our toe in the water, we did it on a limited basis. We tried it, we played with it, we used it on our own websites before we launched it on a customer website. Like we did a fair amount of trial and error on our own platforms before we introduced any of it to a client's platform.
Yes, and I have the liberty of doing that as well. I experiment on myself on LinkedIn extensively because you know I think it's actually fun when I fail because then I get to pick it apart and find out why.
Yeah, my only issue is, and you and I have been down this one before, but like, just it's the rabbit hole effect, right? Like I'm willing to try things and figure them out. Some of them don't work, some of them do. But there's also a considerable amount of time that gets invested into that process. So, that there's a little bit of a trade-off. Like we try new things, but we have to be sensitive to the fact that 3 days later we wake up like, oh, I haven't done any work, paid work. I've done work, but it hasn't been paid work. So
And none of this has worked. So moving
I'm
on.
good with that. As long as, like you said, there's been some sort of learning outcome, like, or and then maybe the learning outcome is as simple as, well, that didn't work. Next.
And let yourself off the hook and be looking for something new.
But I mean, I very rarely have, even on the things that haven't worked, I very rarely have not learned something in the process, right? Even on the ones that haven't worked, we're like, oh, okay, that didn't work.
And
Yeah,
I'm going to say that I don't think that I've ever had a complete failure. There's always been
I
some.
have. I've had several. Thank you. Complete and utter disaster failure. I've had those.
Well, and those are the ones that you learn the most from.
Yeah, I could do with a little less learning and a little more success, but yes, you do learn a ton from the ones that don't work. But yeah, yeah, and that's without getting into another topic, that's part of risk management, right? The willingness to try things, knowing that they may fail, but there's a probability that maybe, there's a high probability they're going to fail, but the return, if they are successful, is very high. So, and that becomes a risk management decision, right? Just a risk reward. So, we've been down that path. We understand risk. We understand, risk versus reward. Sometimes you have to, try things, kind of like the lottery ticket, right? The the winning jackpot is $1 billion. How much are you willing to risk, knowing that the probability is you won't win it? $1? $2? Would you do that?
Me, I'm not
Yeah.
a gambler.
So you have zero risk tolerance when it comes to stuff like that, right?
I put my risk tolerance in other places. I was a rock climber. I
Okay,
am much
there you
more
go.
willing to take risks with my life than with my money.
Well, there you go. So, and that's part of, but everybody understands their own personal risk tolerance, and your business might have a risk tolerance. And again, don't want to get into risk management too far deep down that path, but that is part of the process. There's some risk aspects because there's risk versus reward. The probability is this probably won't work, but if it were to work, oh my God, my life would be great. So I'm going to try it anyway. So those
And
types
I
of
do
things.
look at probabilities quite frequently.
We look at probabilities, and we also look at reward, like what's the upside, what's the downside, to make those kind of decisions. So when we're playing and trying with new things, the reward is this might save time, might increase productivity. Um, you know, when we looked at ChatGPT, the probability was good that it would probably improve our business. The reward was definitely there. The downside was it's a learning curve, and when we first were using it, like some of the content just wasn't great. It's gotten better, but now we're learning how to use it. We're learning how to, like look at it once it's done, and we edit it to make sure that it's not bad or generic or something like that. But we definitely, there was a risk reward in diving into generative AI, and we think that the reward outweighed any potential risk.
Yes, that's smart. Really smart way of
So,
looking at things.
wrapping up, I think this was about lead generation somewhere at the beginning of this episode. But basically what we're sort of saying, and God knows we never say anything new, but this one's sort of a rehash as well, is, if somebody's making you outrageous promises, there's probably a reason why, and if there's a very high probability that they won't come to fruition. Therefore, we are suggesting that you do a little homework, understand your target audience, understand their unmet needs, and do spend the time to create some buyer personas before you launch into your lead development strategy.
Yes, highly recommended.
Great. Well, this wraps another episode of this week. Wow, it's another podcast. Sorry. This wraps another episode of Badass Marketing. Apparently I knew more than one. We look forward to hearing from you. If you have any questions or concerns, please put them in the chat below. We love your comments. If there's something that you'd love us to talk about, drop it in the chat below, and we will be more than happy to consider it. Angela, as always, a pleasure. We'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.